Russia's on the verge of pushing Ukraine out of Kursk entirely, and that couldn't come at a worse moment for Ukraine. I mean, the whole reason that they're in Kursk in the first place, arguably, one of the reasons at least, was to get some sort of better negotiating position with Putin when the time came, and right now is that time. In fact, just a couple days ago, the United States proposed a 30-day ceasefire that Ukraine agreed to, and Russia just denied. And one of the arguments as to why Russia denied it, other than they just want to continue the war and want to achieve their desired war aims, which they haven't yet, is that they still have Ukrainian forces inside of Russian territory, and that's a problem for Putin and some of the Russian leadership. So today we're going to take a look at a handful of footage coming out of the Kursk pocket, and it's mostly Russian forces striking Ukrainian forces as they exit this pocket. But I want to give you an idea as to how this battlefield has changed just in the last couple days, because it's been pretty rapid. So this is Deep State Map here, a publicly available resource. I'm going to zoom in on the Kursk pocket here, which is this blue area here. Now, to give you an idea, this was quite a bit bigger just a few months ago. But the fact that Ukraine has held on at all in this pocket is pretty telling. I mean, keep in mind, about 7 months ago, Ukraine pushed a few thousand soldiers into Russian territory, which should have been surprising to anybody, that their neighbor that they were at war with was able to invade Russia and then hold on for 7 months. How did this catch Russia off guard is a big question, was a big question, and the Russian response was very slow, to say the least. They really struggled to put together any sort of coherent force to actually try to push the Ukrainians out. In fact, this area here in Kursk is where we first saw the use of North Korean soldiers on the battlefield. Plenty were killed, no doubt, and some were even captured by Ukraine and interviewed on Ukrainian TV, where it came out that they only spoke North Korean and could tell their entire story through translators provided by South Korea of exactly how they ended up on the battlefield. So this right here is where North Koreans entered the fight. Now, the map I have pulled up here, one of the reasons I like Deep State Map, I think this is a really useful tool, is you can go day by day to see how the lines have shifted. So again, this blue territory here on the screen is what Ukraine possessed as of March 1st, and it wasn't largely changed for a period of time before that, but then on Saturday, the 9th, we started to see a Russian attack. Notably, they pushed through the pipelines. We did a video on that just the other day, showing the footage from this pretty crazy 15-kilometer trek behind Ukrainian lines. That certainly disrupted the Ukrainian positions a bit, still up in the air as to how much that actually played into this overall collapse, if you will, or retreat. But from the 9th, take a look at how quickly these lines change. Again, the blue being territory controlled by Russia. One day at a time, moving back. Look at that big jump from Sunday to Monday. Here we have the 12th, and then now we're on the 13th. Not much changed overnight, or not much recorded having changed overnight. A major loss here for Ukraine is the town of Sudza. Now, this is an area where Ukraine largely based out of. If we go back to how this territory looked prior to this Russian advance, this was kind of a hub, a logistical hub for Ukraine, and they used this as an area, understandably so, given the road networks, to keep their forces resupplied east, west, and north. So as Russia has taken over this territory, and we actually have footage right now, a couple different clips of Russian forces very clearly in Sudza. So this is one of those times where the lines are changing very quickly. This map, no doubt, is already out of date. Whether or not it's out of date with publicly available information or not is another story. But we certainly have footage of Russian forces right now in Sudza itself. So they're there. We're getting a lot of reports right now from Russian sources, very confident, very optimistic with their progress, and this tends to be how things go in this war. Not as much from the Ukrainian side. It's been very quiet, and there's a couple things I do want to point out here as we zoom out and look at this pocket as a whole. This portion here became a major problem early on. Russia pushed through here. Ukraine was able to cut off this road, which was a secondary line of supply to the Ukrainian forces in Kursk. From the get-go, this was a problem. Again, let's go back even to the beginning of February. You can see how it's already a problem with limited access points to keep these forces supplied, to keep reinforcements moving in, to keep, evacuate casualties moving out, to keep bullets and food moving in. All of that was already a challenge, no doubt. It was a challenge to keep this area clear of Russian drones, and this is actually the area where we really saw the proliferation of fiber optic drones. So drones, rather than radio signals, radio controlled, that are often jammed with electronic warfare. In the Kursk pocket, we saw just a spike in fiber optic drones where there's a cable drugged behind the drone, sometimes up to 20 kilometers or further away, that makes it immune to most electronic warfare jammers, and it did a lot of damage on Ukrainian forces here. Now, we have seen Ukraine pick up this tactic in Wells, and they're using it all across the front also. But if we look at the limited access points that Ukraine had to keep their forces in the fight, we started to see towards the, let's see, it would have been the beginning of March, we started to see an offensive here in the south that Russia kicked off that really started to sever the secondary right there. March 5th, starting on the 4th. Let's zoom in a little bit. Again, looking at the couple different lines, primary and secondary. And if we get in here, zoomed in, second, you start to see the Russians push. And the 6th, all of a sudden, they're there and they have this line, if not directly under the control, certainly within fire control, and it makes it very challenging for Ukraine to move anything along this access point. Now, this hasn't changed a whole lot in the last week or so. You'll see this pocket largely unchanged in about a week, but the damage is done, and Ukraine is having a hard time keeping their soldiers resupplied and reinforced in this pocket. Now, what's not clear at this point, a couple things, is we really aren't getting anything from the Ukrainian forces. Very limited contact coming out of Ukraine as it relates to Kursk. I do believe the overall commander of forces in the north was just relieved. He would have been in charge of this as well, but a little higher level than the actual ground force commander, if you will. What we have not seen is any clear order as to whether or not there is a withdrawal, a fighting withdrawal, a relief in place, anything like that happening in this pocket. There's certainly been no reinforcements, from what I can tell, sent from Ukraine in to try to reestablish control over some of this area. It wouldn't be surprising if Ukraine falls back to reinforced positions a little closer to the border, or at some point ends up just having to move back into Ukraine itself. Now, when I mentioned the timing here being a problem for Ukraine, one of the major arguments as to why Ukraine kicked this off in the first place was really twofold. First was the idea of trying to pull forces away from where Russia was on the attack, taking a lot of territory down here in Pokrovsk. Now, about the time that the Kursk pocket opened up, the fighting down here largely slowed from the Russian perspective. They have still been advancing, although in recent days we've actually seen some advances by Ukrainian forces, counterattacks in these blue areas, retaking some territory. But it did appear to at least have some sort of impact on Russia's ability to attack elsewhere along the front. However, the big argument was that, hey, this is a negotiating chip. If Ukraine actually holds Russian territory, then when the time comes and there's some sort of negotiation over what territory goes to who, where do the front lines actually freeze if they're frozen, having even a couple hundred square kilometers inside of Russia is a pretty significant ace up your sleeve, if you will. So to put this into current context, in the last couple of days, the United States put out this ceasefire proposal that Ukraine accepted, Russia denied. And at the same time, we happen to get a video of Russian President Vladimir Putin moving to Kursk for the first time, I believe, in the last 7 months since Ukrainian forces have been operating there. But more importantly, look what he's wearing. He's in fatigues. This is not a normal look for Vladimir Putin. Now, I don't know that he's worn a military uniform since this war began. He has in the past, but I'm not sure since 2022. And, on the one hand, we don't want to read too much into what somebody's just wearing. But on the other hand, it's hard to overlook that. When for the first time since the opening weeks of the war, there's an actual ceasefire proposal on the table, and at the same time that we're seeing, some rather rapid advances in Kursk, all things considered, Putin shows up wearing fatigues. It's sending a bit of a signal, I would say, that maybe that they're ready to continue fighting, that they still have work to be done, which matches with a lot of what Putin and Russian leadership has been saying as of late. Another key note when looking up here at Kursk is a statement put out by Russian President Vladimir Putin in recent days where he said that all Ukrainian fighters in Kursk, so operating in Russian territory, will be treated as terrorists. Now, there's a couple things to keep in mind there. First off, this is generally believed to suggest that they are not going to be treated in accordance with the international rules of law, not in line with the Geneva Convention. I would say that's a problem, but anybody who's been following this war knows that Russia largely hasn't been doing that at baseline. And we just, unfortunately, today got another video of what appears to be an execution, Russian soldiers executing Ukrainian POWs after they've surrendered. In fact, in recent weeks, there's been an uptick, months I should say, there's been an uptick of documented Russian killings of Ukrainian soldiers that have surrendered. So in this particular case, they label them as terrorists, and maybe it plays better to a domestic audience. I don't know. But either way, they've had no problem killing POWs before this, so it's hard to see why changing the nomenclature, changing the label there really does much at all. Now, I did mention earlier that really the majority of the footage that we're getting right now and that I've showed in this clip that's coming out all across Telegram in recent days has been Russian footage. There's a lot more coming from their side when looking at Kursk right now. In fact, the majority of the clips that we're seeing are either Russian soldiers on the ground in territory that they have just taken back from Ukraine, so kind of identifying landmarks. But then another one, and there's a lot of these right now, and we'll show a few, are Russian drones striking Ukrainian vehicles as they appear to be exiting this Kursk pocket. So, there's no two ways about it. Russia certainly has the momentum in Kursk right now. At the current pace, at the current trend, it looks like Ukraine could be pushed out of Kursk entirely sometime in the next couple of days. I mean, we've really seen a rapid deterioration of the Ukrainian positions there. Now, it's not clear at this point exactly how many Ukrainian forces remain in Kursk. There were rumors that thousands maybe had been captured by Russia. There's no clear evidence of that at all. And again, with the volume of footage that we're seeing put out by Russia, if that was the case, they probably wouldn't be sharing some old footage from Mariupol back in 2022. They would have something a little more recent. So at this point, it doesn't look like a lot of Ukrainian soldiers are being captured. You can read that a couple different ways. On the one hand, that means they are able to maybe get out of this pocket before it's closed in on multiple sides by the Russians. On the other, again, moving back to the comment about being treated as terrorists, it is possible that Russia is, and I wouldn't put this into the thousands by any stretch, but it is possible that Russia isn't actually taking prisoners as they move through and close out this pocket. But either way, it's going to be an area to watch. I would not be surprised to see increased pressure by Russia here, specifically in Kursk, in the next couple days and weeks. But that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.